alone! Ah!
Akira!
Greetings and salutations, everyone. At long last, my War Within review video is here. This may very well come as an extreme shock, or maybe not, but I've been looking forward to spilling my guts out about this expansion, really since it first debuted. Because I have a lot to say about it, from highs to the lows, to the disappointments and to the bewilderment. I'm either going to be applauded for my bold takes or yeeted into the endless void for them. It's the internet, so probably a bit of both. Hello, I am Chronos, an upcoming VTuber who adores Warcraft. You may be familiar with my previous reviews on both Battle for Azeroth and Dragonflight, but you're not here to hear me yap my gums about me. Well, not entirely, but on my opinion of War Within. Let's get right into this without any further delay. War Within and the World Soul Saga came as quite the surprise when it was first announced towards the end of Dragonflight. I had the pleasure of attending BlizzCon and seeing such major announcements in person, posing with every Thrall poster I could find at the time. I was excited and thrilled to see just what they had in store for us after the major success that Dragonflight had, with me specifically. We were going to get a trilogy of expansions with a woven story connected to Azeroth and her world soul. An ambitious idea that I'd absolutely think was the right and the correct call to do, rather than attempt to do it all within one expansion only. Kinda what Battle for Azeroth did, in a way. Even now, I still feel quite excited for the saga as a whole. But back then, I was looking forward to seeing the first chapter and what lied ahead first. I honestly thought War Within was going to be my favorite of the three. Expectations were extremely set high, and were in a very good place after Dragonflight, like I said. And what they had sold on definitely had me quite enticed. Particularly at the start with Thrall and Anduin within Xal'atath. It felt like the boat was sailing already into a sea filled with stuff that I specifically wanted. I pictured Thrall, Anduin, Illyria, and the rest taking the fight to Xal'atath deep underground and discovering the mysteries that the Titans wanted to be left buried. That's not what we got, and those waters turned sour fast. And that really sets the tone for how I personally feel about War Within, I think. As it turned out, only parts of that occurred, and key figures or key pieces were clearly missing, either scrapped or moved to the next chapters of Midnight or Last Titan, which in my opinion left War Within quite bereft of what could have made it amazing. Maybe that's on me, but expectations versus reality really did a number on what War Within turned out to be, as we'll continue on elsewhere in this video. But ultimately, going into this, as War Within unfolded itself, it quickly became very apparent that the expansion I thought we were getting just wasn't happening, and what we got was a disappointment. At least, in part. I've always got to say this somewhere, but if you liked War Within, hats off to you. This is my video and my review, and it's mostly about me explaining how I personally felt about this expansion to others. Nothing wrong about you liking it or disliking it. It's the internet, and we're all going to have differing views. So, let's be nice to each other. Unless you've got mad to say about Rexxar, I will come for you in the dead of the night, and I will rip off. The pre-patches are a good way to figure out how good an expansion can be at times. Not always, but it helps. it helps set the narrative of what's going to happen, who our main foe is, which characters we'll see, and, well, the themes. War Within's narrative, much like the expansion as a whole, was all over the place. Time-gatey and just, well, a hot mess. So much so that instead of doing the festivities of the pre-patch, my friend, Box, and Bluebeck's Thunder and I went instead to the Maw to go and fight Sylvanas. That's how bad we're talking here. The good parts of the narrative came from reaching out to Magni alongside our band of Thrall, Anduin, and Jaina to see what was wrong with Azeroth. A disgruntled Magni does so, and we're left on a cliffhanger on just what Magni was told by Azeroth, and then are immediately told by Khadgar to go witness and dispose of these azurite-tinted ghosts of the past, circulating around the globe. It was jarring and felt less like a precursor of the threat of Xal'atath, which the Dark Heart patch in Dragonflight did a much better job of, and instead just a weird hodgepodge of, I guess, best of moments and memories from Classic and Wrath, which also had very little to do with the War Within. If anything, we should have seen a lot more nods to the Nerubians, Old Gods, Goblins, and Ethereals to help shape our minds as to what's coming. And maybe more Radiant songs from Azeroth herself to the player characters, as I don't think we ever actually hear her song ever, but lore characters did. Overall, a pretty bad pre-patch, and it's a shame that the last good pre-patches, in my opinion, was the Legion and Battle for Azeroth pre-patches, which were almost a decade ago now. Yeesh. Now, gameplay is always a weird one for me to talk on, namely because I usually have very little to say on it because I really only care about the characters, world, and story usually. Not to say I don't care about gameplay, but it's usually not my first on my list of things that I'm gonna gush on or talk about. But this time around, I feel like I'd be doing an injustice by not talking about the gameplay. While War Within's story, as we'll soon come to realize, fumbled itself in places, the gameplay felt like it was nothing but good, really. Warbands were something players had asked for ages, and finally, we got a far more alt-friendly system for our entire account. An account-bound bank? There you go! Transmogs regardless of what class that you earned for the whole account? There you go! Warbands were definitely a great addition, and I'm happy it's here after all these years. And it really feels almost wrong whenever I go to a past iteration of WoW without it in it. Hero talents are something I feel like are both a good and a bit of a bad thing. I'm somebody who's going to pick the class fantasy and spec that I like over what's meta, but I know many people who only pick the meta. And unfortunately, it can be felt when they nerf your hero talent for another. I quite prefer Pack Leader over Dark Ranger any day, though I do wish that we had less passive abilities and more things to press, which is going to be an issue going forward and beyond apparently. They just keep taking away our buttons. Especially after they made Dire Beast a passive now and are removing my favorite ability that they added in Dragonflight, Call of the Wild, in Midnight. Ugh. And I certainly agree that it would just feel better if it was more of a cosmetic class appearance than anything else related to gameplay here. I am glad to hear that they're not wholly done with hero talents, but they definitely feel a bit smaller than they should be currently. They feel less like something special and more like just another set of talents for your spec for the new expansion. Which I do feel like they should feel more epic and have something that just makes your spec feel far more stellar and cool with some kind of special ability attached. Delves are mini-like instances that are absolutely a treat for a solo player like me. I'm not much of a raider right now unless my guild is doing it and I'm free that night. I don't really do Mythic Plus unless it catches my fancy either, usually if the set or whatever or the mount reward is cool. So, for somebody like me who mostly just engages in world content, delves are right up my alley. They're not really hard to do, they're quick, and sometimes add to the world with story and character. I do hope they expand on it further by giving more enriching lore to locations with Midnight and Last Titan, and other future expansions after this. And I also hope we do see them include more companions at a more frequent rate than just one per expansion. I like Bran to a degree, though he's been quite flanderized throughout over the years to a bumbling dwarf treasure hunter, and not that expert we came to know in Ulduar who knew when it was correct to be serious or not.
Prisoner. Ha! With its binding shattered, its influence unchecked, it's gonna come after us, and we're gonna be the prisoners.
And I also like Valyria, but I do want to see some other heroes in the picture a lot sooner. Please give us Rexxar for Last Titan. Please and thank you. Kiss kiss. The main location for the War Within is rather the new Isle of Dorn. Though less is about the Isle this time around, and more what lies deep within it and underground, of the Ringing Deeps, Hollowfall, and Aj-Kahet, with some other locations underground and above later on, which, yeah, we'll touch on. And since a lot of people enjoyed the Dragonflight recap, I guess this serves pretty well for that too. In the Isle of Dorn, it's where we're first introduced to these new Earthen, and our quest to stop Xal'atath truly begins. It's also where Dalaran takes us after we've been tricked somehow by a returning figure who Zali played us into thinking was completely fine. Wow, shocker. And Dalaran itself is wholly destroyed and consumed by the Dark Heart. Ugh. This is where Jaina and Thrall leave to gather up the Alliance and the Horde, leaving things to the rest of the cast to fix things up against the Nerubians who damaged the Coreway. Illyria splits up, though, to go and avenge Khadgar, who's most definitely and certainly dead. He's gone, guys. His wisdom ball is inactive, and therefore, he dead. Unlike most of the War Within, barring Garesh, the Isle of Dorn is an island and isn't underground, which does separate it in many ways from what's below it, but in a good way. I will say there was and just is something far more comfortable about the Isle of Dorn because you aren't walled off underneath by anything. It's very open and feels purposeful to sort of give you a break from the underground. Very beautiful, and I'll say that always about WoW zones and art team. For the other zones too, really. They always cook, and I don't exactly hate the underground, and do forget we are underground most times, but it is a vibe I do prefer of seeing the skies and ocean. That's very much a me thing. Both the Isle of Dorn and the Ringing Deeps, which we'll come to later, do a good job of getting us familiarized with the Earthen, which come in their own groups. We'll get into them more later. But it becomes important for us to rally all of the split Earthen leaders and factions into working together again, in spite of their beliefs or disbeliefs. Amongst the council, you have Merix, the one in charge of keeping the Earthen safe. He has an alter ego of where he's essentially a crime boss where he controls the more darker side of the city of Dornagol. So he's kind of like a two-face. He's the good part of the Earthen capital and the bad part of the Earthen capital, but like he controls both, which is kind of an interesting thing to do with the character. Eldagon, who's the leader of the Stonebound, later the Unbound, who walked away from the Titan's edicts when it became too much for them. Her people were in charge of the Coreway, which was of great need of repairs after the attack by the Nerubians recently. High Speaker Elric, whom we don't encounter here, but he's the leader of the Machine Speakers, basically the Earthen's tankers and mechanics. Again, we'll get into him later, but he's quite the character, later to be replaced by Brinth, whom we later seek knowledge with and journey with, who's got a frickin' Doc Ock arms on her back, so that's pretty neat. The characters and members of the council I think shines the most here is Baelgrim, leader of the Stormrooks, basically their Earthen's flyguard and military, whom come across as hostile to us and his fellow Earthen who's abandoned the Titan edicts, but over time warms up to us and overall his people once again. I love his entire arc, and it's unfortunate that after said arc he dies, after taking out the Nerubian Lord, whom was a problem for us at the beginning when we first arrived on the Isle. This was originally going to be a complaint, but it bothered me initially that he just didn't throw his hammer from above at him. But they do note that he tried that before the first time and it failed. So his death, while super tragic and frustrating, at least makes more sense as to why he just, jumped down and died in the explosion. Still hate that a character that I liked, but it is what it is. Surely that won't happen again. Right? With the core way functional, mostly, we can use it to transcend to the depths beneath the island finally. Just to get right into this war within. Badumts. And move on to the Ringing Deeps. The Ringing Deeps is our first zone underground, and boy does it feel the most underground, next to Azj-Kahet. Ringing Deeps certainly feels like we're deep beneath Azeroth, and I guess that's quite intentional. It's very rocky and lava-y, but not to a point where you won't see plant life anywhere. Definitely got some prehistoric vibes in some areas, just without the dinosaurs. It's personally my least favorite of the War Within zones, though. This is where we meet the machine speakers for the first time, or at least where most of them are meant to be grouped up, and we want to get some answers as to just what exactly is happening down here, and to the rather important Hall of the Awakening, or rather the Awakening Machine, lies, where new Earthen are made and reborn from stasis. High Speaker Elric, from before, is very quick to dismiss us, and we get a very good idea that he's just got quite the big ego, and quite the high horse about him. Even if he's not exactly on a horse of any kind. He's not on a ram, whatever, he's not on anything. Well, he's on a chair, I guess, or a bed, or... it's a thing. He's the one who sent Brinth up to the surface after she had questioned his authority on many occasions. This is definitely where the Bronzebeards shine the most here as a family of Moira, Magni, and Dogron II. Magni still is on a rather fumbled state on how Azeroth kind of ruined his life to be this stone crystallized dwarf that the Earthen mistake for a Thragar, which is a whole thing altogether. But as time goes on, it's clear he can use his gift still for the good of all, and even uses it to protect his grandson of Dogron from the Scaradin. Speaking of the Scaradin, they are a rather cool and old idea from the Cataclysm that were supposed to feature in Grim Batol. And that's kind of a fun nod too, as Xal'atath cursed Grim Batol in her daggery form back in the day. So, in a way, history still sort of worked out in both ways here, because she's also the one responsible for the Earthen going dark mode and becoming the Scaradin here too. In an unrelated or related note, Fearbreaker, the weapon that's traded so many hands, from Anduin to Bane to Anduin to Magni again, somehow was lost in the fall of Dalaran and somehow ended up in the Ringing Deeps. Moira takes it up again and is given the blessings by Magni to wield it as she is deserving of it. It's a nice moment, but I gotta wonder how the heck it wormed its way down here exactly. The trajectory there just doesn't make sense. Through the discovery of both Dogron II and Magni, they uncover that the High Speaker has gone traitor, and his ego was completely boosted by Xal'atath here, that he could save his people by turning them all into the void, even corrupting the machine that basically gave them new life. Through Magni's sacrifice, after being urged by Azeroth's own voice here and his grandsons of shedding his crystal form, he's able to purge the corruption that the High Speaker started, and life for the Earthen can start again without the nasty void involved. Magni is flesh again and isn't dead, allowing him the opportunity to live his life beyond Azeroth Speaker and be, well, whatever the heck he wants to be. Champion of his people? Ambassador of his people? Who knows? It's up to him. The High Speaker, or former High Speaker I guess, is astonishingly dealt with very quickly and is given quite the sad-ish fate of losing himself in the process, which is just another nod to what Xali usually does to anyone who follows her voided path. Don't simp for her, guys and gals. And, well, if you do, well... And here we come to Hollowfall, where Anduin and Illyria's stories begin to blend together a bit more here. A good while ago, people of the Arathi Empire, a human kingdom once assumed long gone and dead, ended up here by the will of their emperor's own vision. Extremely dedicated to the lights, ends the fight against the void, the massive, ever-changing crystal of Beledar magically transported them from the sea above down to the deep earth here. Hollowfall is probably my favorite zone, not including the patches. It's absolutely gorgeous, and featuring of this crystal from going to light to void, changing up on how the whole zone works, is extremely cool. Especially in how its corruptive nature of turning to the void is tied to both Sargeras, the stabbing the planet with his sword, and making it go from this light to void occasionally ever since. But also tying that too with the black blood of the old gods, which also surfaced when Sargeras first stabbed the planet. I'm not exactly a fan though of what it probably is, as it turns out it's not some Naru prison or Naru ship, but is some kind of crystallized world soul fragment thing. Ew. It's here that we begin to tackle more and more of our fight against the Nerubians, and we do so with the Arathi here as our reinforcements for the time being. They're somewhat friendly, but there is a lingerance and warning that they might not always be that way, and some of them will take things to the extreme for the sake of their lights or their emperor. We do meet Firin Lothar, a very distant family relative of Anduin Lothar, who ended up in Hollowfall by her own actions of slipping into their fleet, and became the first orphan of their new home. More on Firin later, but she's vital to Anduin's own arc of regaining his light here, after a lot of back and forth of his own mistrust and doubt, in the aftermath of his deal with the Jailer. I wouldn't say it's exactly quickly resolved, but it is resolved and is mostly dealt with here. While not stated earlier, I do think Anduin and Magni do have the strongest arcs in all of War Within, as it's wrapped up in both ends in a satisfying way. I do think it could have been paced a little bit slower, but that's another thing we'll get to. While Anduin gets the comfort and resolve that he needs here, we reunite with Illyria after she had been away in her own hunt against the Nerubians. We also deal with the local cult of the former Arathi turned to the dark side by not Mr. Nathanos Blightcaller here, of Aelric, who works with the corrupted Jinyu, or rather Kobis, with his entourage of fellow Void worshippers and the Nerubians into making Beledar shift completely to the Void. Which of course we stop, and then begin our own siege against the Nerubians nearby, finally venturing forth to the final zone of Azj-Kahet. And Anduin is captured. Oof. Azj-Kahet is the final zone of War Within, barring the patch zones, of course. This is the realm and secondary kingdom of the Nerubians, who might remember from our days in Northrend. These are of course, though, not the undead Nerubians, but rather living ones, as they evaded the War of the Spider, aka the war between the Scourge and the Nerubians, by kinda just not getting involved. Initially, Azj-Kahet was my favorite zone, as I generally really like Nerubians. My favorite Scourge champion back in the day was Anub'arak, whom remains a very tragic figure still. So much so that the Queen Neferes was dismissing his pleas for aid and stayed out of the war, like I mentioned. It actually really rubbed me the wrong way of these transmissions of the back and forth a lot. Was I supposed to like her for not helping him out and his people? Because I got the opposite feeling. Like, I know they would probably have been doomed too, but yeah, I really didn't like that. Here we uncover that Nerubians are not as unified and down for the ascension that makes you bug ugly. No, I mean it. Like, this is a complete downgrade from how they originally looked like. Even their queen of Ansarek looked way better before. She took that sip of black blood and just turned ugly. It is these rebellious Nerubians of the Severed Thread that we mostly deal with in our alliance to take the fight against Xal'atath and her own joint alliance with Ansarek. This group of rebel leaders are mostly of the old guard of the Nerubians, ones who still cling to the ancient ways. The general of Anub'Azal, my personal favorite, relieved of his duties since he wishes to stick to them. The Weaver, a confidant of the original queen, and of course the Vizier, who portrays himself as a faithful to the queen still, but in actuality is working against her. And in a fascinating twist, the old way is very much the good way, and here it definitely works. Unfortunately, later on, seemingly after the raid, once the queen is done in, Anub'Azal does die. Oy. And he does die off screen after getting some pretty nasty wounds from his rival. Yet another really cool character dies. Hopefully, hopefully that's the last one, right? Right? Amongst this kingdom are survivors of Dalaran whom we save, and also uncover more and more about the Black Blood, the blood of the old gods, probably mostly Cthuns, given that's right where they are and where the sword had struck. As earlier, I had said that the Black Blood really only started to surface a lot when Sargeras stabbed the planet, and who is in Xal'atath? Cthulhu. Why do the Rubians look more humanoid than bug? Cthulhu's own race looked a little bit more humanoid too. So, fun stuff. It's Ethereal stuff, but it's fun, I think. We also uncover a group known as the Heronir, which are a secretive group of these troll elf looking guys, very much druids too, who keep their sacred trees or trees safe, who primarily keep to themselves. Want to know more about them? Well, tough luck, Buster. You gotta wait an expansion to see their realm and their people more. But they're basically are into learning about the unseeming and opposing the Black Blood. What's the unseeming? Well, it's basically a realm of darkness that the old gods are kind of tied to. It's a bit of a mystery of itself, but it's not a good place. Which is unfortunately a plot dropped here too. Mostly. Orwena is our most vocal and our most willing Heronir. Much like Farin, I do like her, but I wish we interacted with her way more. And Anduin is ultimately rescued and saved by the Rubian of the Vizier here. Anduin thankfully knows better than to judge the Nerubians here by their cover. You know, the book by a cover phrase. And see these Nerubians as a people worth fighting for and can be trusted. And during one of these transcendent days, the Queen of Ansarek makes a rare appearance. Unfortunately, Illyria is still on the hunt for vengeance for Khadgar, and she tries to land a blow on Xal'atath, who is quite present. Which goes as poorly as you think it does. The Queen gets very angry and gets away, and Xal'atath attempts to make her move once again. Yeah, one of the constants is Xal'atath always trying to convert Illyria to Team Void, all throughout the story and all throughout the campaign. It never really works, and probably never is going to work. But Illyria gives her the finger basically, but that's clearly not going to stop Xali from trying again and again. But it does kinda end Illyria's arc of straying away from others and embracing those that she cares about. At least for now. Overall, the zones of War Within were mostly alright. They didn't grab me in the same way that other zones from previous expansions did, which is unfortunate. I liked it in part, but not in a way that makes much of a grand standing. I do like that the overall narrative was connected though, and that's something I do think was sorely missed. Once we've started our little rebellion against the Nerubian Queen, and I suppose are up and ready to go as we're ready to start our campaign in full. The Horn Alliance forces have finally arrived by sea, and to the story's credit, it is a very cool moment. full of so many iconic characters who do arrive on the shores of Dordogne, even readying the Earthen for their own fight against Xal'atath and her minions. Unfortunately, there isn't much of a payoff of any of these forces really doing much, beyond the fight against the Nerubians later and Xal'atath's forces in Hollowfall later. But let's not count our chickens before they've hatched, just yet. That's the finale of the campaign, after all. The major beats of the campaign, to start with, were Thrall's bond ship of the Earthen and their Stormrooks. This, in particular, is truly the only story Thrall really gets for the story of War Within, which is most definitely something I'm gonna touch on a great deal more later. Together with the new leader of the Storm Riders, Osella, manages to help her get her own footing back with the elements, something Thrall is also seemingly having his own issues with still. Here, they rebond with the entirety of the Stormrooks, which is vital to the Earthen's own safety and their way of life. Additionally, the Earthen, they get along last completely in their unison and reject their oaths to the Titans and in turn summon the wrath of the Titans upon them, which is something the Horde Alliance helped them deal with as well. This is maybe one of the better moments of the story, foreshadowing the insidious nature of the Titans, who don't really seem to take kindly to their rules and laws being defied by their own creations, evidently even predicting this to happen at some point, which I do think is super important to the story that we're building up to with the Titans' return to Ulduar in Last Titan, and ultimate turn against them from our gods to basically our foes. One of the more set-up storylines is an interesting conflict of taking back what was once a golem factory for the Earthen that was now taken over by some strange goblins. And these goblins are one of the stranger turn-ups throughout the underground of Khazad-dûr, which we do learn as to why much later. This group, called the Dark Fuse, notably sounding quite similar to the Black Fuse of old. The same group of goblin mercs who worked for both Garrosh and the Iron Horde are the primary issue here. We do deal with them by turning the golems back on and drive them out. Interestingly, the leader of this group of Dark Fuse here escapes and is never dealt with, so maybe we'll see him again in the future. Before our final conclusion, we, with Lillian Voss, seek out more information as to how the Ascended function, or are made. We uncover that the former Nerubian queen, Neferes, was the first to be forcefully turned into one of these cockroach-looking behemoth monsters, or rather a Nerubian Hulk. But there's still a mind in there and still a soul to be saved. Along with us in our venture is a Nerubian spy who willingly became ascended to get more information for us. Their name, Yateki. But this becomes our first revelation that the ascended Nerubians can and will be forced to serve Xal'atath, and she strikes at us while we try to flee. We don't kill her, but we do deliver this knowledge to the widow that her former queen is technically still alive, just very mutated. That whole plot with Yateki and the Ascended Nerubians kind of having a hive mind is also a bit dropped, as it doesn't really come up too much later. But maybe it will, maybe it won't. Lastly, we take our forces of the Alliance, Horde, Arathi, Earthen, and Nerubians to take the fight against Xal'atath, whose forces have also amassed with all of that black blood. This seemingly following the defeat of Queen Ansarak. More into her and her underwhelming story later. We learned that the black blood she's been collecting functions close to how the Shah sort of functions, where our negative and dark emotions can empower the black blood. And that same black blood is coursing through the Dark Heart and is all over the battlefield. Illyria and Anduin move to confront Xal'atath within the Priory of the Sacred Flame, learning that all along that it was Xal'atath's plan to lure them here to Khazad-dûr, and get exactly what she wanted from us from it. Time and time again, Xal'atath has proven to be a tricky individual to actually harm, to actually kill. In one of Illyria's best moments of the entire expansion, she manages to legit trick Xal'atath into weaving the Dark Heart to another place when she tries to dodge, tries to protect the Dark Heart, cracking it with one of her arrows, and forcing Xal'atath to retreat and get her favorite new weapon restored, leaving in a complete rage and stating that it changed nothing. And in an honest way, it really only delayed things and kinda made them worse for us down the line. And out pops Daddy Khadgar. Yep, he's alive. In Raven form, no less. Don't know how that works with Atiash destroyed, but I guess he kinda just mastered it. Who managed to survive that absorption into the Dark Heart by becoming magic itself. He isn't looking so good though, after Xal'atath did a number on him prior. And it is this magical and good moment that Anduin uses the light to revive Khadgar from the brink of death, ending the chain of arcs in one fell swoop. And as much as I'm going to have some heavy criticisms for War Within by far, this is a very solid end to the first arc, wrapping up Anduin's, Illyria's, and partially Khadgar's stories for the moment in a pretty satisfying way. It's definitely War Within's stronger moments, especially for Anduin, by having his connection and faith with the light finally restored, giving him this really great moment of saving everyone's favorite archmage. One thing I was caught off guard by was the level of people not seemingly liking or driving with the idea of Khadgar in a wheelchair, or a magic wheelchair, citing that magic should be able to just whip up his legs, or that he should have prosthetics, or something else, something cooler. Personally, I like it, as it shows that while Khadgar did survive his ordeals against Xal'atath, there is a consequence to that survival, and living with those wounds he suffered through. Is the magical wheelchair semi-silly? I'm sure, I guess. I'd probably make it a regular wheelchair myself. He's already got magic, I don't know why you need to combine the two, but I don't think it's that much of a problem that people make it out to be. And I think it's good to have some positive representation to have those who are disabled. Much like Drekthar, another major lore character who is currently in a wheelchair. With the first arc done now, let's get right into the patches that followed right after them. One of perhaps the most jarring experiences, man, I'm using jarring a lot, put War Within in a jar, I guess, was going from Xal'atath weaving herself away with the Dark Heart and wondering where she went off to instead us celebrating the anniversary event instead, as an entire patch. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad it got the attention that it did, given it was the big 20 years of World of Warcraft and 30 years of Warcraft itself. There is a lot of fun to be had of just seeing all these characters hanging out at the Caverns of Time and chilling there, giving us Lorwalker Cho back for the first time in years, and just having some pretty fun activities to do, like the mount-off, transmog contests, etc. Even the puzzle questline was pretty nifty too. It even gave us Rexxar to tag along with in Northrend, which you know how much I adored them doing that. But I do think making it a patch created its own sort of problems, especially with how bad I think War Within's pacing got following its first arc. It does feel like it takes forever the big chunks of the story to start again, to pop up again following this. So, while absolutely a good thing to have, maybe it shouldn't have been advertised or portrayed as a patch, and instead just been an anniversary holiday event as it always has been. Disregarding the anniversary patch, our first mini-patch was truly the Siren Isles, which they retooled as an island expedition map into a smaller zone for us to explore and plunder. It's very much one of those rare maps where you kill rares and collect treasures. It's very similar to the Forbidden Reach or the Timeless Isle, basically. It was some kind of cursed isle that had many different inhabitants on it at one point. From Naga, Vrykruel, humans, pirates, sirens, and so on. You know, sirens where it got its name from. We're ferried over there by the Bilgewater Goblins, Earthen, and the Arathi, who are the three major factions interested in the Siren Isles the most. It's also got a heap of grand wyverns all over the isle, which as a hunter it became something that we could finally tame, and you know, as a horde hunter, this was an incredible thing for me, so kudos go to there. It would not be the first tame in this expansion that put a smile on my face. Additionally, it gave us a wide assortment of transmogs of both old and new added for us to wear, which was also great. On the Isle, you retrieve a special ring that actually just show up in your character, which is a rare thing in the game. It's quite powerful, at least for a time, and is even sought after by both Halia and Queen Ajara herself. Also on the Isle, it changes from quite the irregular place to a stormy and messed up one, with all sorts of nasty creatures about for you to contend with and against. A big part of this in terms of the story is its connection to Beledar, as apparently the massive chunk Crystal of the Light has a sister object to the massive crystal in Hollowfall. According to the Titan Keeper, Arcadis, Azeroth has a wide assortment of these crystals scattered throughout the planet and are connected to the World Soul in some way. I personally am not the biggest fan of this revelation for both Beledar and Lorendal. I much preferred when Beledar was unique. To me, it just seemed more like it was connected to the light and connected to the Naru and their ships or prison. I liked it as a play by the light to kind of try and take Azeroth for itself by launching this sort of crystal down onto Azeroth. Having it already kind of be connected to Azeroth already, predating it, I don't like it. Not some crystal that formed from Azeroth's very being. Don't like it, not for me. And unfortunately, the plot of the Siren Isle really doesn't advance the story very much either. The most it does is remind us the threat of Ajara and her Naga still being out there. Rather, instead, that comes into play with the beats involved with the goblins and Arwena in the Ringing Deeps and Hollowfall, after speaking with her goddess through Beledar and also splitting up with her fellow Heronir, Gazlo, Ransik the Shiv, and Arwena uncover that Gallywix is back, following his retreat from the Fourth War and leaving both the Horde and his own cartel behind. He's since made a big operation here within the Ringing Deeps somewhere. They're after something, and it's big, and it's bad, and it's something that will be touched on later, of course. While not really a patch, it felt prudent to cover it as its own thing, as it has nothing to do with the Siren Isle or the Goblin plot. Fate of the Kirin Tor is a questline where, you guessed it, is to uncover just what is transpiring with the mages of the faction of the Kirin Tor, now that Dalaran has been destroyed. Focusing namely in the aftermath of his destruction, the rallying of several iconic mages, and figure out just what the Kirin Tor faction should do next. Were it just to be a send-off for the city, I feel like it would have worked wonders. It tackling the tragedy of Khadgar, Kalik, Jaina, and Aethys Sunreaver, all on how they feel about their now destroyed city, their home. The mourning of it really would have been powerful stuff, and in some parts, it is. There's some good stuff there with Aethys, whom has a history of self-blame over the events of Hellscream and the Sunreavers and the Purge of Dalaran. Jaina and the Mana Bomb, and of course the surprising cameo of Kel'Thuzad, a former leader of the Kirin Tor, as a sort of simulacrum or memory in one of his pocket realms. But ultimately, I think it really fumbles hard as an entire questline. As I said, had it just been the Mourning of Dalaran as a city questline, I think it'd be pretty good, but it's actually a questline debating whether or not the Kirin Tor should stick around after everything, which is, like, what? Why are you doing that? Ending that there won't be another Dalaran, ending that it should have never been a fortress, or a military-esque state, that it as a organization just made so many mistakes, which I don't agree with. The Kirin Tor was founded as a group to basically police and regulate magic, but also safeguard it. Dalaran acting as a force for good to move around the world, acting as a sort of city and bastion, but also a home for the good of the world, was good. It was Xal'atath's machinations that ultimately led to its destruction, not the Kirin Tor, not Dalaran. I don't think that they should be playing self-blame here. It should have ended with that they can build another magical city, a new Dalaran, so to speak, that would continue to act as the magical city and main hub of the Kirin Tor. Its own ending also seemingly is quite confused with itself too, stating that it won't have any leaders, and yet, following this, Jaina is asked to lead and hints at wanting Aethys to be a voice with her too. There's also a severe lack of the other Council of Six, whom I assumed all died at Dalaran, but apparently are just all fine, just are off screen somewhere. They're not here either, and it's just weird. I'm just trying to make sense of it all, but it just seems so confused with its own ending, and I'm hoping that the response from it is met, because I don't recall too many people are happy with the Kirin Tor just being defanged and losing what made it special. Losing that floating city in the sky, losing that magical city since Warcraft 3. But I personally found that this questline is just both frustrating and confusing. And I'm hoping that in the future, we see a new city for the Kirin Tor, and the Kirin Tor acting as it should. Not whatever it's pushing itself to be now. Alright, our first major patch of War Within. And man, this one is a conflicting one, but I'd say it's mostly a good one. For the first time ever, we're having goblins as the main leads. Really goblins as the main sword of the patch. Sure, you had Mechagon for the Horde hanging out with the goblins there, but that was mostly gnome-centric. Here, it's goblin-centric city. Following that thread where we left on, Gallywix is up to something, and up to something big. What is it? Well, he's made his own bargains and arrangements with Xal'atath. Not good. Promising to aid her with the fixing and mending of the Dark Heart that Illyria had just cracked. This being something that actually does make a lot of sense, as the Dragon Soul, or the Demon Soul, was originally crafted, or at least aided in its creation, by Neltharion's own goblins, much like the Dark Heart was. Along the way, Gallywix uses the Black Blood of the Old Gods to make his own advanced weaponry, which gives his own power over the other cartels in Undermined, which are, of course, the Bilgewater Cartel, the Steamweedle Cartel, the Blackwater Cartel, and the Venture Company. And of course, there's also the Darkfuse Cartel, which serve him. We traverse from the Ringing Deeps, seeing the destruction that the Black Blood does to just about everything that it touches, into Undermine itself. Gazlo is apparently not too keen or happy about returning to the Undermine, as he greatly disliked it, but is urged by his new companion and confidant Arenzik, who believes that anyone can make things right for Goblinkind. It's Gazlo, who's showed time and time again to be the best of all goblins. Now, I didn't touch on this earlier, and I'm going to touch on this now. This is something that I forgot to script even, but Gazlo showed great interest in Undermine within Aj-Kahet, and here, that he feels like a completely different character. I find that very odd, and I'm wondering why they rewrote this. Specifically, I think I found the Gazlo enticed and interested in Undermined to be far more compelling. I'm wondering if in the original take, Gazlo was someone who was unfamiliar with Undermined and was born outside of Undermined, and they were going to tackle that instead. And I will admit, I think I would have preferred Gazlo as a fish out of water story, someone who does not know Undermine like us, and that Renzik would be someone who's more familiarized with it personally. We figure out just what Gallywix is doing down here, and for who and for why. As it turns out, the leader of the Steamweedle cartel, Nightfall, is the one tasked with learning just how to fix the Dark Heart, blackmailed into compliance just like so many others, by holding his wife a prisoner. And solution? Well, it turns out that Kajamite, the very mineral that gave goblins their advanced thinking caps so long ago, is the means to repairing the broken Dark Heart, which Gallywix quickly does use to get it fixed. I do wonder if that has something to do with the fact that Kajamite might be a reduced or slimmed down version of Azurite, so I wonder what the combination of Azurite and the Black Blood would look like, since that's, the blood of the old gods and the blood of Azeroth herself combined. So I wonder if Xal'atath might play around with that in the future. We save all those whom Gallywix had under his gross thumb, essentially removing any blackmail that he had over the cartel and their leaders. Unfortunately, all throughout this time, Ethereals have also caught wind that the Dark Heart is in the city of Undermined, drawing the attention of Illyria, who also traverses the city and gives us aid. Unaware when she's brought down there that the Dark Heart is there too. At least at first. Once we're all aware, that's when the Ethereals make their move and strike. Gallywix with the Dark Heart in hand is quickly overpowered, and the esteemed relic is yoinked out from him, and into Phase Thief Azir's hands, who leaves to Koresh to use for his master, Dementius. A pretty good twist here, before all that, I know I just said it, that everyone assumed that these Ethereals are all doing this in the service of Xal'atath, but that's not the case at all. All of these Ethereals are in complete service to the Void Lord Dementius, Xal'atath's former boss, something to bite at Gallywix later upon his retreat. With the Dark Heart gone, Illyria leaves with it to trail after it wherever she can. Hope is quickly dissolving, and Gazlo is seeing little reason for them to stay in Undermine. As payback, Gallywix sent his top hunter and member of the Venture Company, Nikki the Fixer, who aims to blast her black blood-infused weapon straight at Gazlo, almost killing him in the process. But Renzik pushes him out of the way and takes the blast instead, killing him instantly. This act pushes Gazlo to act full rebellion mode against Gallywix. He's had enough, rallying almost the entirety of Undermined to end Gallywix's reign over them once and for all. Nikki is killed, Renzik is avenged, and the push to remove Gallywix completely from Undermined is made in the liberation of Undermine, where the Darkfuse cartel kind of meet their end, but not really, and Gallywix is crushed underfoot under his very own mech, thusly ending the story of a villain from the days of Cataclysm for good. The Goblin cartels all convene and plan to make Undermine a better place than before. Undermine is definitely War Within at its strongest. It's got a pretty good story throughout of taking the fight to Gallywix, and also trying to tie in those ends with Xal'atath, whom understandably is relying on goblins to get what she needs fixed. The Dark Heart is very important for what she plans to do, and that's always very clear. It's really the tie-in that kind of keeps War Within all really connected well. It's what's holding it all together. The goblins also shine quite well in their own culture down here, and it was a real treat to finally see Undermine after all these years of it being hinted at. And Gallywix absolutely shines in every scene that he's in. He's absolutely the funnest part of the patch and is probably War Within's strongest villain. Maybe not through actual power, but certainly he's their strongest character. A part of me will absolutely miss him, and it feels like it's an end of an era with him now gone. Unfortunately, there are some drawbacks, by which I mean the complete handling of the Bilgewater cartel. While I do think the other cartels down here could have been handled better, I think the Bilgewater was maybe done the dirtiest. For starters, they do very little in the city of Undermine in opposing Gallywix, their former boss, when they should the most. Very few Bilgewater goblins show up or do anything besides Gazlo, and a repeating offender for War Within, as we'll fully see things later, on is that apparently the Bilgewater in Undermined have no association with the Horde. Yep, we're talking about that. Which is, in my mind, super boggling to say the least. Especially when you account that there are actual members of the Bilgewater Cartel who were very much present when Thrall invited them into the Horde down here. Like Sassy Hardwrench, whom doesn't do anything in the story down here either, when she absolutely should. You definitely start to question a lot of things as to why Gazlowe doesn't ask aid from the Horde down here, or Thrall specifically, whom is kind of just hanging out in Donegal with Anduin right now, not doing a whole lot. You've got a wide range of military of the Alliance and Horde just above Donegal. They're not doing much, and it feels odd that they were only used to combat the Nerubians at the very end of the campaign, and nothing more. I somewhat understand if they wanted to keep it a goblin story, but then you have Illyria and Shaw show up, breaking that rule pretty quickly. Knowing just how much damage Gallywix had caused amongst the Horde in service to Sylvanas and his own ends, and by extension to the Alliance, I don't think it makes no sense for the Alliance and Horde to at the very least end up down there to aid the Goblin cartels. I'm not saying give the kill to Thrall, but I am saying that the double standards here need to be pointed at here. It at least makes sense to include Thrall in this sort of story, when he does have loose ties Gallywix, considering that he did make Gallywix, or allowed him to stay, as the trade prince back at the end of the Kazan storyline, or the Lost Isle storyline. Especially when you have some tie-ins to Zandalar of all things, as Gallywix ruined a sacred site to the Zandalari, and we returned to Zandalar through that drill hole to fend off goblins. Would have been a good placement for either Rokon, Zakan, Talanji, or any Zandalari to become relevant for a bit. Even slightly, it doesn't need to be for very long. Could have even connected Orwena through this too, whom for the most part of this patch also kind of just right off after going to get Illyria for us. Yeah, they used Orwena just to grab Illyria, which I think is also kind of demeaning in a way. If we're going to make arrangements so that the Alliance feels included, I would do the same for the Horde, which does bring me to Renzik. Prior to War Within, Renzik was a lone goblin with not much of a story who hung out amongst the ranks of the SI7. Little was known about him, but he really didn't have much of character or relevance. Then Undermined came along, having him take the fight against Gallywix. They gave him a whole story as to why he finally joined the SI7, and why he always wanted to improve things down to the city down here. I don't really mind that they chose this time to finally explain what Renzik was all about. That part was fine, but something really rubbed me the wrong way when it felt like he was made into Gazlowe's kind of conscience here. Already, I didn't really think Gazlowe needed much pushing to start in wanting to stop Gallywix here. That seems quite normal for his character. It felt kinda odd that they made Gazlowe's arc into being the reluctant hero here, when he's locked in time and time again for way less, both on Draenor and in Mechagon. Having him only lock in when Renzik died, a goblin he barely knew by the way, just seemed less so when Overbite ate it for him as well. Laszlo, while yeah, not much was to him or his story either, was a goblin that Gazlowe clearly entrusted to lead the Bilgewater down here for him, and basically died for him down here when opposing Gallywix. I think his death should have mattered way more for Gazlowe, and should have been what got him up on his feet, not just Renzik. At least not in full. All in all, while I have many gripes in how they treated my favorite faction and favorite cartel, Undermined is still one of the better parts of this expansion. Probably my favorite looking back on everything that it did. With a pretty conclusive end. And an amazing villain to top it all off. Even some bits and parts hinting that something else might come out of it at some point. there's still some missing Darkfuse leaders out there. Gazlo hints that Galliwix might have foresaw his defeat, and that something dark might come out of it. Maybe that cannon will finally fire. No. Yes. Probably not. Okay, now that we're coming off the heels of a pretty decent patch, all things considered, what about the mini patches that came after it? While Siren Isle was bereft of major plot beats, it was at least decent and in part had newish content. Nightfall is what came after the Goblin experience, though, of Undermined. A high coming to a very steep and stinky low. I'm not sugarcoating this one. The story that we got here was... ugh. The story that we did get here was that the Nerubians wanted to avenge their queen after her death and rally an attack on Hollowfall. We defend, we succeed, nothing really major there, it's honestly kind of just disappointing. Hardly touched on it before, but the Nerubians were already feeling like a plot thread that was very much still hanging. Like, there was something missing there, something not finished, and this seems like a good place to sort of talk about that following the raid, which I also didn't really touch on that much. There's hardly any involvement of the Nerubian leaders, and one of them is dead. Yeah, Anub'azal. Also hardly touched on that. Anub'azal, you deserved so much better, buddy. He really was one of my personal favorites of the expansion, and yeah, that nail keeps getting added to why I'm upset, I guess. This really could have been a great way to advance the story on what exactly is going on with the Nerubians ever since we allied with them and their queen was dealt with. Or even the people of Hollowfall as well. But it's super half-baked to the point where it just feels like filler. I'm guessing they'll do something with the Nerubians and their story, maybe in Last Titan, with their sister kingdom of Azul Nerub, maybe. The rest of Nightfall's patch isn't much better, as it's mostly just a goblin arena where you kill an assortment of random old foes from dungeons, and the return of the Visions of N'Zoth. Meant to, I guess, prep us for what's to come in Midnight somehow, or Last Titan maybe, which could have used both Thrall and Illyria to confront their dark visions of themselves. This is probably the bleakest and most disappointing part of War Within. The story barely continues, and it's on full stop here. Nothing really good. Poorly executed gameplay and poorly executed story. I've little to praise for this patch, and I was quite bummed about it as a whole. This is War Within definitely at its worst. Okay, if Nightfall was War Within at its bleakest, what of the Legacy of Arathor? Well, this may shock you, as I think Legacy of Arathor is most definitely my favorite mini-patch of War Within, giving me everything that I want specifically. To start with, the main core of the Legacy of Arathor, with its quest chain, is following Feyren, Gaia, Eitrig, and Danath Trollbane. This is a follow-up storyline of the Heartland narrative and book, where the Alliance and Horde almost came to blows due to Danath's niece, Meryn Trollbane, stirring the plot and almost risking the armistice, that peace, between the Alliance and Horde. She almost ended it. Meryn was imprisoned for crimes afterwards, but that didn't mean her influence was on pause either. Within the Arathi Highlands, a new human group is rising, and it is known as the Red Dawn, comprised of the Scarlet Crusade, Arathi Syndicate, Stromgarde extremists, and the Defias Brotherhood, as they attempt to bring yet another war and are very much that human supremacist group. They are very much that. They are very much human baddies who need to be put down and stopped. And they are ultimately stopped, and it's revealed that Meryn is of course the leader of this Red Dawn. Meryn challenges her, bests her, but is ultimately prevented of ridding this maniac by Danath, which, yeah, that's definitely the weakest and definitely the worst part of this storyline. Just change it to Meryn escaping on her own with the aid of the Red Dawn, but that's just me. The strength of this is the inclusion of factional differences for the Horde and the Alliance players alike. It's clearly setting up something big with Meryn and her Red Dawn. I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm an easy guy to please. If you actually give me a Horde character who speaks and acts within the story, and for that it was Eitrig, I'll be very happy. I really like what they did with Hammerfall here. I really like what they did with Eitrig here. It has a Horde story, a Horde presence, and that's one of the things I've been complaining about the most for War Within. So getting that here was a treat, and it's something that I have to give them props for once more. On top of the Legacy of Arathor, we also got lore walking, which is a new form of questing that has you be told a old story or a new story by our favorite lore walker, Cho, from the days of Mista Pandaria. It feels like that again, which is a great feeling to have. Telling us the story of Arthas, Ethereals, Xal'atath, and even later the story of the Void and Blood Elves. It's an amazing way to get people up to speed with the lore, but also show us things we never have seen before, like the Brokers and Ethereals sharing a history and a planet, or Xal'atath's own imprisonment to her daggery prison by the old gods joined together. It's something I've wanted for the game for a while, and it is most certainly one of the best and most welcomed additions of War Within. I would go on to say that Legacy of Arathor was maybe that missing charm that War Within was in desperate need of, and definitely put a smile on my face all throughout. Well done, and hats off to them for this one. Please, please, please more patches like this one with its inclusiveness of the Horde. That's what I want to see. That's what I've been waiting for. More of that, more highs like this one. The next and the final major patch of War Within, the grand finale, in a way, of this part 1 of this 3-part saga. Ghosts of Koresh. Ghosts of Koresh is a fascinating one to be sure, as I'm somebody who really likes ethereals. So, you know, maybe make them playable someday. Hint hint, nudge nudge. For this one, our resident expert, and quite honestly the face of the ethereals at this point, Locus-Walker, asks us for aid and summons us to his home of Koresh, which is under peril and the return of Dementius, who's being successfully revived by the potent powers of the Dark Heart, really showing just how powerful this relic is if it can bring back a Void Lord from, well, I wouldn't call it death, but, you know, from not being around, not being existent, I guess. It's definitely mixed in with the jarring experience and the pacing of War Within, though, of going from the defeat of a goblin traitor king of Galliwix, the complete annihilation return of Dementius up in space on another planet. This definitely needed a bit more of a bridge to get to. Not saying that there weren't foreshadowing signs of us going to Koresh all throughout the expansion. It was even in Dragonflight when Locus-Walker was warning us about his return, or the parent connection return of that Radiant song that he had heard from Koresh. Or those constant appearances of the ethereals, both in Ashkahet and Undermined, and to agree, also in Dragonflight 2. But it cannot be understated at how odd this felt and how quick it felt. Just a bit. We go from pause, pause, pause to barrel rush, basically. Aboard Tazavesh, our main stronghold and hub and safety net in this shattered world, we fend off the ethereals who try to take us out before we do anything, and we unite with our would-be and temporary ally of Xal'atath. Begrudgingly, I might add, who's our best network and understanding in how to not just survive Dementius, but also defeat him. Venturing out throughout Koresh, we collect the Reishi ribbons, and through various factions, allies such as Venari, and enemies alike, we can endure the unique properties that Dementius brings to the table. And of course, we're successful, but the drama llama is absolutely soaring right now between Xal'atath, Locus-Walker, and Illyria, where Xal'atath reveals that it is Locus-Walker's very fault that the Koresh is the shattered world we see now. As it was not just Dementius' fault, it was done on purpose by the Koreshi Trust, by Locus-Walker, really, to destroy the Void Lord, or at least try to stop him. Rocking that very friendship and making her bring the Rendorai to this place. Trust in this group is absolutely splintering, and Dimensius is very close to being brought back in full power. And through Xal'atath and these Rishi ribbons, they are used to empower us and prevent us from being killed with ease by the Void Lord. So that's no longer a problem, at least. We confront and defeat each and every one of Dimensius' lackeys, including King Celadar, the king of the Ethereals who betrayed his own people for power, whom also made a return after dying in another storm, very similar to Dimensius actually, by making an alliance with the Void Lord. It's cut short though, as Xal'atath captures him for her own schemes for later in Midnight. Dimensius, of course, is ultimately defeated, but trapped in the Dark Heart. Xal'atath stays behind, while the heart remains unstable, assuring we get out safely. How nice of her. With Dimensius and Xal'atath seal inside, our victory is assumed by Illyria, but Locus-Walker moves to grab the Dark Heart, causing a trigger that, it ultimately kills him. God's damn it. We're really 3 for 3 for dead characters that I really liked in this expansion. Xal'atath, now freed, takes an even more empowered Dark Heart with Dimensius, a Void Lord, now inside for her own dark plans, leaving Illyria with her dead mentor who swears to avenge him, and Xal'atath who promises that she's coming for any and all that Illyria cares for, her family. Following this rather dark and sad ending, I'll fully admit, we also reveal an astonishing development that Koresh, a world soul that we believe destroyed or eaten by Dimensius, is still alive. And through that sacrifice of a rather mad soul scribe, whom almost wreaked havoc on Venari's own plans, preserves him, allowing the chance for the world of Koresh to one day flourish again. A dark ending and a happy ending all at once. Actually really liked this bit and found it unexpected. I've definitely the usual complaints here. I do wish we had more than just the Rendori present here. In my opinion, we could have had the Blood Knights led by Liadrin or the Illidari led by Kain here to get some measure of a Horde rep, or various other Horde characters that I'm bound to harp on. But I digress. It's a usual pain, it's a common pain for the War Within, sadly. But beyond that, I mostly would say it's tragic that we didn't get a lot of ethereal characters here, mirroring the lack of Bilgewater Goblins for Undermined outside of Locus-Walker. Not too many ethereals really showed up in the story. It felt very broker heavy, and despite my gripes with Shadowlands, I don't really have issues with the brokers, but this definitely should have been the time for the ethereals to shine way more than the brokers, especially with their nemesis of Dimensius returning and being defeated. But I do think this was absolutely the correct decision to end things off with a bang, and end things with Dimensius most of all. Dimensius was very one note, but an amazing spectacle and in an amazing fight. And getting rid of him from the board, again, allows Xal'atath to do as she pleases. I think of the villains between the two, Xal'atath is the far more interesting one to play off of, and having her basically be free and get her former revenge, and also one-upping her boss, was more than the correct choice here. There's something that I didn't like, and that does do damage to what I liked in Ghost of Koresh, but that's more what follows after this patch than the patch itself. Overall, I think I liked Ghost of Koresh. Maybe it didn't wow me as much as I'd hoped it would in some places, and a part of me does wish we got to see parts of Koresh still intact here and there, but it was a pretty alright major patch, and it was one way for the War Within to end. Okay. And the last mini patch of War Within, meant to wrap things up, but also get that connective tissue going for what's coming in Midnight. The warning feels less like a wrap-up to War Within stories, and more like a pre-patch for Midnight, and also has maybe the most frustrating things going on in it too. So, a vast majority of the mini patches for War Within, for me, did a number on it. The major patches were alright, but the mini patches, except for, you know, the Legacy of Arathor, yeah, that one was good, but the other ones not so much. For starters, the main vocal point of the story and the main characters it decided to go with here are Arathor, Vereesa Windrunner, Illyria Windrunner, and of course, Sylvanas Windrunner. I hope you like the Windrunners because that's the patch. Here, Arathor and Vereesa are mourning the loss of Dalaran, which is something I really like, and it's probably the best part of the patch. Everyone was pointing out that when Dalaran first fell, where was Vereesa, the leader of the Silver Covenant? The very High Elves who called Dalaran home and still call it home. Why wasn't she present? Why did she move? Answers we really don't get, and we also hardly get much time to mourn for Dalaran either, as she is bombarded by the visions sent by her by Azeroth. Visions of what is yet to come, and is what is foreshadowing events to play out in Midnight. The Twilight's Hammer, or rather the Twilight's Blade, renamed in their new service to their new goddess of Xal'atath, moved to try and kill both Arathor and Vereesa for some reason. Probably sent there by Xal'atath to kind of, you know, show up that promise that she gave to Illyria. They're of course stopped, and Arathor proposes rallying the Windrunners to aid in the plight that is about to surround Silvermoon. Arathor first goes to Illyria, who is busy chasing down Ethereals, now loyal to Xal'atath. When that doesn't really go anywhere, Arathor turns to Venari, who helps him in Anne's the Champion to return to the lovely Maw place. I am so glad to be back here. Not. In the Maw, we stumble on Sylvanas, who is fending off an invasion from the Void, which we successfully drive off. We assist her in her task of helping out the souls there, which for the most part is done with little issue. Until we get to Zelling's soul, who is left to rot in the Maw for all eternity. I'm sorry, what? But putting everything on pause here, but Zelling, a hero of the Horde, is maybe one of the most undeserving souls to be in the Maw. If Sylvanas isn't gonna bail him out here, then you better let somebody else get him out. That just angered me. The fact that she just left him there. That better not be the final ending, because that man deserves so much better. Sylvanas needs to do her job and get him out of there. I don't care about the beef between these two. He needs a good rest. He either needs a second chance as an undead, or he needs another chance in a different afterlife, because this is some Khono Ugh. Anyways, Sylvanas does her lovely little jingle, yippee, and teases her own form of return to Azeroth someday. None of the Windrunners are exactly rallied just yet. It's setting that up. Illyria is doing her own thing, her vengeful hunt, and isn't allowed in Silvermoon because of her banishment and her void issues. Sylvanas has her own duty to fulfill in the Maw still. Better free Zelling. But it's definitely setting up the three sisters to return and fight for Quel'Thalas, definitely. Which I do think will be cool if done right. I'd love to see Sylvanas rejoin the Forsaken, as well as the Horde, as their form of own champion. I also just don't want her to ever be their leader again. Could lead to some interesting bickering and back and forth between her and the Council, which I think could be fascinating. But it does leave our cliffhanger left to talk about, and oh boy, I've got some things to say. Illyria successfully tracks down Xal'atath and where she went to after Koresh, to some dark unknown world, where she uses the overflowed power of the Dark Heart to drain the last vestiges of a rather naked but loyal Ethereal. Poor guy. Never simp, folks. Never simp. And through it, it all pulls together. All of that power of the Dark Heart that she's collected to make a portal. Huh? Yeah, I'm gonna vent about this one. Absolutely. All all of this build-up for what I consider to be really 2 expansions just to make a Portal of the Void to tunnel on through is maybe the biggest letdown of all of War Within. I expected the Dark Heart not to just be around forever, but I think at the very least I assumed that it would play a part for most of the saga in some fashion. Making a portal wasn't unbelievable. Really, that's the most bland answer you could have given me if we were proposing what it was going to do, but I assumed it was going to be so much more than a battery for a portal. Already the Void has its own breaches and portals that it can make. Yes, it's the Nerubians that were using it, but still, I'm not exactly sure why a portal of this size was necessary, especially when it's using the power of Dalaran, bits of Beledar, Dementius, and whatever else the Dark Heart gobbled up in it. Just for this? I assumed that she was going to use the Dark Heart to rip Azeroth out of the World Core, or wherever she is currently, or corrupt her with the dark energies she's completely collected. I cannot lie, the Dark Heart was absolutely what kept me invested in the War Within the most. What she was planning to do with it, what Iridikron and her ultimate goal was with this tool that Neltharion made, just to have it be a battery for yet another portal, I'm just let down. This, which is maybe the most common feeling I have about this expansion, is feeling let down. It's expectations versus reality crumbling apart. Maybe the Dark Heart will play more of a role than eating it in the dirt, or just being decor in my house as a trophy. But as it stands right now, this feels like it definitely tanked a lot of the goodwill that I had for Ghost of Koresh. Not to say that Ghost of Koresh is bad now, but I am just really angered by this ending. Angered by what was really what felt like it was building up to something good by the end of War Within, just to throw it aside. I just do not. It is frustrating. Beyond frustrating, I'd say. Now that we've completely touched on the patches and mini-patches, let's get into my thoughts on all of the characters and villains of this expansion. Starting right out of the gates, Thrall was my favorite character. He is my favorite character. He's my old reliable when Rexxar just doesn't get the spotlight. When War Within was first announced, I believe going into this that he was going to be the guy absolutely leading the charge and the mission against Xal'atath. And staggeringly, he was not that. For the most part, he was there a bit at the start, and then left to get reinforcements, and then helps the Earthen for a bit, and getting their Stormrooks back. And then mostly just faded into the background and was given the support role. He was also apparently still having the elemental issue in spite of the fact that those were restored in Shadowlands, that those were even used to make the Earth bridges when we were fighting Sylvanas. Not sure why they're doing this still, not sure why they're doing this plot again, when there are so many other better plots they could do. To say that I was disappointed by the lack of Thrall might be an understatement. He was absolutely my most anticipated character for this expansion. The level of advertisements, the amount of art that had him in it, led us all astray, and it's quite honestly shameful looking back on how much they did this, and just didn't do anything with him grand as a whole. Especially when they first announced the expansion that he would tackle his new role and place within the Horde. I guess that was scrapped among many other things, so here's hoping he plays a larger role in Midnight or Last Titan, but this was certainly a big reason War Within was just another struggle for me. Marrying to Thrall, Jaina isn't far off from him, and really lands in that same boat of a character advertised as a major figure for the War Within, really only to leave and bring reinforcements and do very little. I will say that she felt like she had a bit of a larger role, by comparison, in the fate of the Kirin Tor, acting now as the Kirin Tor's own leader again, seemingly. Her having a story with Dalaran's fall absolutely made the most sense, and I figured that's what they would play with her the most on. Now, her becoming the leader of the Kirin Tor was not something I expected, of course, but also not something I'm completely against. That makes me wonder if she'll place somebody else as the leader of Kul Tiras, though. Talia, maybe? Or if she'll simply lead both the Kirin Tor and Kul Tiras at once. But, yeah, same thing said on Thrall. Really wish that she and him did more. At least they both got some time to shine in the story of Heartland, at least. The leader of the Dark Iron and the daughter of Magni, really a common theme that I'm noting with a lot of War Within as the more I go on, is just how much the advertised characters, or at least the characters who should have gotten a lot of screen time, really just didn't. Which certainly adds on as to why I didn't think this expansion resonated with me. When Moira was first spotted as a major player, I assumed that she would play quite an important role given she's the leader of the Dwarves. Or one of the Dwarves, the Dark Iron rather. Hell, I pictured her being super integral in the Earth and joining the Alliance. And while she did help them with getting their people somewhat on track, and had a decent arc with both her son and her father and with Fearbreaker, it really felt like it didn't utilize Moira very much. And even had both her and Magni basically just leave once their part in the story was finished. And I hate sounding like a broken record, but she deserved better, and so many others did too. They deserved more time in the spotlight. The former king of Ironforge and the former speaker of Azeroth, Magni had probably one of the strongest arcs in War Within, at least in my opinion, of going from the fraggled and upset dwarf and the helpful granddad who outright locked in and saved the earthen race with his own sacrifice. And for his earnest and legit golden act, he was rewarded for it by having his body no longer entombed in crystal. He was freed to be himself, free to do whatever, and it was something I never really considered for him to ever get, but in a good way. I'm happy for the guy. I'm curious to see whatever he chooses to do next and advise his grandson, maybe. Champion for his people, maybe. Own his very own Bronzebeard bar. Who knows, but I'm glad that he got a happy ending. Another character that I think got a pretty good and pretty decent arc was Anduin Wrynn. Anduin, of course, was coming off the tail end of his depressing arc of Shadowlands, of disappearing and wanting to not hold that crown. But in War Within, he finally got his light back, got his mojo back, and seems to be on the road of recovery. I will say, similar again to the other characters, but it was very odd that he kind of just off in the same way that Thrall, Jaina, and Moira, and a little bit of Magni did. Also Dogron, and we're gonna get into him in a bit here too. But yeah, Anduin, he definitely had the best arc, and him restoring and saving Khadgar with his light, that being like his big act and connecting all of the dots together, it was good. And I'm curious to see if he's going to lock in and become the king once again. The son of Moira and Dogron I, as I was just talking about Dogron, once forever trapped as a baby. Okay, well, not literally, but this guy was stuck as a baby since Cataclysm. But finally in War Within, now he's finally all grown up and is making a name for himself. Even if he's a beardless dwarf, which is kind of illegal in its own right, he's an absolute delight, and I do love his character. I love how he's deeply fascinated in the story and the lore, which, hey, I can relate to that, that's me, and wants to uncover the secrets of the past. Very similar to his uncle Bran in a way, just less about treasures and dangerous relics, I guess. I like that he's a sorcerer, kind of like his dad and his mom. Like many other sons and daughters of major lore characters, I always get excited to see what they'll do, and given that he's on track of becoming King of Ironforge someday, I'm wondering what kind of leader he'll be. I really hope that he at some point meets with Dirac, and I hope that they establish a bond too. Dirac being the son of Thrall, who doesn't really play as much of a role here in The War Within, but did get a short story at the very least. Hurin is a very new character, and with a very positive personality. Maybe you just have a specific type here, but I absolutely adore her design as a whole. Fluffy colors, blind eyes, weapon limbs, I dig that. That is a Banneret design if I've heard one. She also has a very well done relationship when she's bouncing off of Anduin of all people, bringing out the best of him when he is feeling at his worst. I will say I was surprised at how friendly she was when the trailers depicted her as somebody who was about to tear her foes limb from limb. I do hope she becomes a mainstay in a way, especially when it comes down to taking the empire that she came from. Maybe she'll be the new empress of the Arathi, and that level of kindness and openness will play a role in her arc. Or maybe she'll just remain a champion of her own people. I like to see her explore Azeroth more and more, and I really like her interactions with Gyra and the Horde too. She seems to greatly appreciate the Horde just as much as she does the Alliance and Anduin. Another case of somebody I really wish got more screen time. That's a lot here. Orwena is a part of the mysterious Heronir and is about the only one that is constant in wanting to work with us in opposing the Black Blood or whatever else is threatening the life that she values. I'm glad that it seems like she'll be playing a larger role in the Heronir zone for Midnight, which is very much scrapped and made into a zone for that expansion instead, which was clearly meant to be War Within's originally, but hey, got moved around. At least we're getting it. But it is super disappointing that she didn't get to shine in War Within as much as others did. Our introduction to her helping us out when we first arrived with the Nerubians really cemented my interest in her and her people and kinda already made me like her from the start. So more of Orwena is definitely a plus. Do that. Gazlo is the absolute horde trooper for all of War Within. Truly one of our only main characters who actually has a spotlight and has an arc, at least in the most part. The newly made trade prince of the Bilgewater Cartel following Galliwic's departure in the 4-4. And that is one gripe I wish that they showed him doing more, is leading the Bilgewater Cartel as a trade prince. I get that that's not really his shtick, but I'd like to see him boss people around in his own way. He's really chill and really cool when he did it in the Mechagon patch, and that was back when he wasn't even trade prince yet. It's just something we rarely get to see, and I just like it when leaders do that. I do also wish that he got to show off his tinkering skills a tad bit more, especially in operating his shredder. Having a mech battle between him and Galliwix feels like it writes itself, and I'm sad we didn't get to see that. Okay, not exactly saving the best for last here. I'm sorry, Illyria fans. I'm sorry, Illyria Windrunner. Originally, Illyria used to be one of my favorite Windrunner sisters in Legion. The mystery surrounding her disappearance led to her openness to using the Void to fend off against the Legion or anyone who would do her or her family harm. But over time, I really do think the overuse of her, particularly in War Within, did such extreme damage to her character, to a character I used to like. So many other characters should have shined next to her, but instead it felt like they chose to just use her over and over again. Especially when she's supposed to be one of the best of characters against the Void, and they constantly just have her fumble the bag when in opposition against it. It especially felt grating when it felt like she could have done something bigger and better, and they just gave her Void headaches. Her best moment in the entire expansion is still that arrow trick that she does to the Dark Heart, and that part in a way made things worse when you think about it, because she gets a Void Lord in it. It's crazy at how much it worsened her character. I also feel like she absolutely downgraded from her original design in Legion, going from this muted and pale design and lacking colors and a hood and lacking what made it go, hey, that's Illyria, I really feel like they just went way too far with her and should have kept more elements of her previous design. And I know that some of that is intentionally meant to make her look like she's different, that she's going on a different arc, but she looks like a completely different character and not in a good way. When I first saw her new design, I thought that that might have been Varisa, her sister. Such a jarring look, and I think it just leans way too hard into the void and dark aesthetic, that gothic aesthetic. I don't like it. She simply feels like she's the main character of War Within, when I feel like so many other characters should have been sharing that spotlight. I'm not saying boot her from the expansion, I'm not saying give her less. Give other characters more screen time with her. But because we didn't get that, and we're just sort of left with the Illyria expansion, as I'm going to call it, and as much as people want to say that Thrall was overused in Cataclysm, because they're going to use that as a comparison point against me here, I'm willing to bet, but Thrall really only had one dungeon, one raid, and a few cinematics, and maybe like one or two quest lines, and I guess a role in the starting zone for the goblins. But I would argue that Illyria takes the cake with how much she's in War Within by comparison. She's in patches, she's in mini patches, she's got so many cinematics, her own theme. It's crazy at how much they invested in Illyria as the character here. And I just wish that they had Anduin and Thrall with her along the way. By and large, this was a good example of why you cannot and should not be reliant on a single character for its full expansion. Even the ones we really liked. You need to let that spotlight be shared on others, and I really just did not like what they did here with Illyria, because I feel like by having the spotlight shine on her, and mostly only on her, they ended up fumbling her and making her look bad, which is not good. She should look like a complete champion against the Void here, and I'm hoping that Midnight does some saving grace here and does some work to repair that. In a way, Ghost of Koresh made me like her a little bit more because I agreed with her and empathized with her, but I feel like they ruined that with her having a headache again when she was confronting Xal'atath. Like, Our first villain, or I guess raid villain, whichever you prefer, Anzarek was the daughter of Queen Neferis, who betrayed her, taking that Nerubian crown all for herself, and fully entrusting Xal'atath in the process. Once more, another downgrade, but at least this one is believable and consistent with how much the Ascended just completely lose what made them cool in the first place, losing that Nerubian factor. She really doesn't have a lot going on, and definitely feels intentionally overshadowed by Xal'atath here. She doesn't really have that many feats besides breaking Ronin's statue in Dalaran, and she also doesn't have really anyone she kills. I mean, definitely her whole story has an effect on everyone as a whole. I mean, I guess she does betray her mother, but her mother isn't dead, she's mutated, so that's like the only thing she really has going for her. And yeah, it makes me not really like her. Really, it's a bit of a shame that the first major Nerubian villain since Anub'arak is this forgettable and this bland. She's definitely the best example, I guess, of why you should never make a deal with Xal'atath or trust her. She will stab you in the back. Because as soon as you're useful to her, as soon as you have used all of what made you useful to her in the first place, she will absolutely abandon you. Ultimately, I didn't really like her, but I wish I did. She just was so bland. I sort of feel like I'm almost cheating here, but he is very much his very own villain here, again. Jester Gallywix was the major big bad of Undermined, and the second major villain of War Within, and he absolutely steals the show in every scene that he waddles right into. He's just got that charm and character to him that differentiates him from other villains, especially in War Within, but very much in what came before him too. What absolutely helps him here is that he's got an established history with all of WoW. Formerly, he was the leader of the Bilgewater Cartel, starting all the way back when Goblins of Kazan were his rivals, and he took everything from you just to make a point. there was always beef there, always animosity, and here we got to see that he just had that with everyone, really. Gallywix was very much Gazlow's opposite. Where Gazlow represented everything good in goblins, Gallywix represented everything bad in goblins. And honestly, it's done it in a much better fashion than Onsarek, which we see where Gallywix has his own motives and plans beyond Xal'atath, but we also got to see yet again the risks of teaming up with her, but he didn't suffer nearly as bad as Onsarek did either. And unlike Onsarek, who feels like a faded memory, one I barely even recall sadly, Gallywix is going to stand the test of time. He'll be remembered in more ways than one. Absolutely, he was a fun villain to hate, and in a way, I am going to miss him. I still want to get my hot rod back, though, from this little green f***. Dementius is technically our final villain for the expansion, but he's also kind of just the stepping stone for what comes next. Dementius is an antagonist first introduced to us all the way back in Burning Crusade, a massive Voidwalker back then, whom was responsible for the destruction of the Ethereal's homeworld back then too. And back then, he was just the finale to a quest. Nothing as big as a raid boss, nothing as big as a dungeon boss. We dealt with him, and that was that. Except it wasn't his total end. And I think taking something as big as him and ending him in a quest was definitely a Burning Crusade move. But they did remedy that, and they made him one big boy. As the final, yes, apparently final Void Lord, after I guess eating everyone, or maybe he's the final physical Void Lord, he is now left Xal'atath as the next one in charge of the Void, upon his own defeat and probable death here, which I definitely think was the correct move. Dementius works well as a major threat, but I also don't think he'd work as the boss in charge. He's just very one note, something that has low goals of really just eating everything, and there's nothing bad about that, but he definitely served his point here and served his point super well. Probably not my favorite villain for War Within, but maybe my third. I think he's mostly hurt by the fact that he wasn't given much screen time, as he should have gotten both within his own patch and a bit prior. Maybe we should have gotten a bit more hints of him through smaller patches. Alright, I'm quite conflicted about our new and improved Harbinger. On one hand, I think she works really well as an antagonist to this extreme, going from that fabled dark dagger that had a hand in many different moments of Azeroth's darker days and darker periods, to a freed entity on the loose out to claim her prize of our world. I just wish they'd maybe be a little bit less vague with her and be more open about what her true intentions and plans are right from the go. It seems like she wants to consume Azeroth just like Dementius did, but I have the feeling she wants to do more than eat her. I figure she wants to replace and become a World Soul, or rather a Dark Titan herself, which is one of the oldest claims of what the Void Lords all want to do. I personally think that she shines best when we're forced to work with her, even if she's up to no good, which has happened on few occasions, and I will say that I almost wish that they'd write her as the player character's responsibility, since we unleashed her on the world. Would maybe finally give the player character more of a personality and more of their own arc and stake in this, but I guess that's a bit more on the Age of WoW showing itself than anything else. I'm not sure they could do that in a realistic fashion as much as I'd like them to. Overall, I'm looking forward to seeing just how she'll be a villain for the whole saga. Orthan, she did seem a bit more loose or gentle with using her, and maybe that was smart as to not overuse her and make her, kind of annoying. She's maybe not my favorite villain for the saga, as that goes to Gallywix. Overall though, but I will say she's got a good chance to eventually resonate with me as one of Warcraft's best villains over time, amongst the greats. I know I've been a little hard on War Within, okay, pretty hard on War Within, and that it's not exactly going to change or get better from here. I do want to absolutely give my flowers wherever I can, though. War Within is quite divisive for me. It has some good and a lot of bad, but reflecting on the good I think is super integral for this review going forward. I do the same for Dragonflight, and I do the same for Battle for Azeroth, and I'll do the same here, and so on and so forth. Astonishingly, audio dramas were something that came and went during Legion, and were a highlight back then too. From discovering the Thousand-Year War, to the journey and destination of just what Gul'dan had gone through when Archimonde tossed him to our reality. The same was done here for the stories of Renzik the Shiv and his background, and even our beloved Locus-Walker. Rest in peace, homie. It's something I absolutely hope to see continue going forward, especially for the World Soul Saga, but also beyond as well. Cutscenes, specifically the two that we got for the Nerubians of Ashkahet and Illyria, were absolutely treats to just get before War Within came out. Yeah, I know that I harped on Illyria, but her short was really good. While normally we would get 3 or more, we really only got the 2. And yeah, of course I want more, but that's just because they're that quality that I really like. Even if the Illyria one was done in an art style I wasn't used to, I liked that at least it gave us a story for why Illyria has her new look, even if I don't really like that look. I like that they at least addressed it, which isn't very common in WoW. They don't usually go like, oh, here's why they look different. It also felt very anime or something close to it, and I'd love to see that styled for more characters and their own stories in the future. Just more animated Warcraft is always welcome and greatly appreciated. It makes me really want a Warcraft animated series someday. We got a decent chunk and decent amount of booklet stories on Thrall, Anduin, Illyria, Farin, Dogron, and Gazlowe, among some others. These all really add the build-up of their roles for War Within, and while some of them really didn't get to shine as much as I wanted them to, at least we got a fraction of screen time for them in these stories, which were good. I particularly really like the one with Thrall and his family, something I definitely hope we see more in the future, both in game and in books. Also, I really like the Heartland story. That might be one of the best things to come out of War Within, and if you haven't checked it out, I did a whole video talking about that. It's really good, and I think it drives home what Warcraft should be about, what War Within should have been about. I think one of War Within's strongest things it did do with its world and questing was what it did with its many races that lived there. From the Earthen's way of life, and their very deaths of becoming statues, the Kobolds' reliance on their candles to fight off the shadow, to the Arathis' own faith and why they like those beacon towers, etc. And of course, the Nerubians, who rely less on sight and more the smells around them. They don't really have very good eyesight, despite having a lot of them. It's a fraction of what is explored or said, but I do think they did a pretty decent job with them all, and I think it's worthy of some credit here. Music in WoW is always good. Some expansions definitely outperform others. Like, I don't think anything is going to come close just how good Warlords of Draenor and Mists of Pandaria were with their music soundtracks. But War Within definitely stands out with its music in Undermined, and just how snappy and jazzy it got. I love how unique it is down there, and I think they captured what kind of music would just radiate in the Goblins' major capital. But I'd also be doing a major disservice if I didn't mention how above and beyond they went, and how hard they went for Dementius' theme. That is the, equivalent to Why Do I Hear Boss Music? To the choir inhaling in their master ends their doom, hyping him up as he's about to consume us all, to the complete and sudden change of how it's not Dementius that should be feared, but the champions coming in to stop him. It's so heroic, so well done, major praise has to go there, for sure. Stay a While and Listens have become a staple since Legion. Truly, they're those dialogue bubbles I wish we had since Mists of Pandaria, if I'm to be honest. but I'm so glad we still get them. Especially in War Within, I really think that they added a lot to our favorite characters, particularly the conversations between Magni and Anduin, Moira and Magni, Jaina, Thrall and Illyria, and lastly my all-time favorite is between Thrall and Anduin near the end, where they mirror their poses, where they are just looking upon Sargeras' sword and talking about Varian and that letter he left him. Truly, I wish we had more moments like these between all of the characters, especially Thrall and Anduin, which I really thought was going to be the heart of War Within. This deserves a video of itself, so I'm not going to get too much into it here, but much like the Dragonflight Heritage armors, they absolutely cook with the most recent and potentially the final Heritage questline in WoW for the Pandaren. They captured things super well there, and it deserves some major praise, I feel like. Even allowing us to return on the Wandering Isles on non-Pandaren and tame Cloud Serpents. Yeah, you know how I mentioned how we got another tame that I always wanted for years and years, for a decade? Yeah, finally got my Cloud Serpent that's green. Thank you so much for that. Sometimes side quests can really be the highlight of the expansion or patch too, and they range in emotions too. The big ones that I remember quite fondly was the dying Earthen, whose very memory is fading fast as he nears his final death and becomes a statue. While the Earthen weren't exactly my cup of tea as they were a bit too robotic for my liking, they did a really good job of making you feel hurt and just feel bad about this situation, mirroring what can happen to us and our elderly. They did a really good job with this, and it's just one example I could think of at the time of some of the stuff that they did cook with in War Within. Okay, I was nice, I gave War Within some praises. Now I'm gonna get mean. Now I'm gonna get mad. I'm gonna get into why this expansion, as good as it had in part, absolutely just did not capture me, and honestly, it just let me down. I think one of the most telling aspects about War Within was that it wasn't intended to be part of any form of saga, any part of three-parter, which is extremely upsetting but understandable. As far as I can understand, the development for War Within started all the way back when Shadowlands was still active. That gives us a 2-year development during both it and Dragonflight. And all things considered, it semi-worked as the part 1 of the trilogy, but there's also just parts where you could tell either they were left to the wayside or were moved to other parts of this trilogy. The Black Blood of the Unseen plotline was completely dropped despite it being quite integral to the Dark Heart, Xal'atath, Galliwix, and other forces misusing it. It's never quite dealt with and is left as open-ended right now. The Haranir, who were clearly planned to be a faction that we'd fight beside and visit, were also scrapped and moved in Midnight. Both situations, I think, hurt the story of War Within. To me, it just felt like the most interesting parts of what could have been in War Within were removed or were given to either Midnight or Last Titan, effectively leaving War Within a bit hollowed to me. Especially when you consider just how much the Earthen and Nerubians and how much their stories feel left behind and shelved. I assume those two will be specifically handled in Last Titan and other places, but I've no real idea. As brought up, when we went to the end of the first campaign, straight into the Anniversary patch and the Siren Isles, I really feel like the pacing we went with for the majority of War Within either went very slow and focused on things that really didn't have much to do with the overarching story, or just went super fast and jumped right from Undermined to the outer space of Koresh. It felt like that War Within could have really benefited from some of its stories and patches being used to maybe focus on lining up each of its arcs just a bit better. I understand that they did what they could in a way with lore walking, but I do think we needed a bit more of a preamble for Koresh specifically. As much as I liked Ghost of Koresh, it did still sort of feel like it was not really a part of the War Within story. It felt like it had more to do with Midnight than anything else, excluding the stuff with the Dark Heart, which did hold things together. Dalaran is maybe one of the most beloved city capitals in the game. It helped us in our first fight against Scourge up in Northrend against the Lich King, and again in our fight against the Burning Legion on the Broken Isles. Here, it almost did the same for Khazlogar, but was gobbled up by Xal'atath and her Dark Heart. While both the epilogue patch and the Fate of Kirin Tor attempted to focus on the mourning of the city, it didn't land, and to be honest, they've never really been great at handling the deaths of cities like Theramore or Terrasil being destroyed. I get that they probably wanted to give us a reason to hate Xal'atath, and in a way it did work, but I also feel like the characters, and us included, focused more on the loss of Khadgar than on the loss of Dalaran itself. If you were to kill off Dalaran, I feel like the city deserved way better than it got here. It did not leave nearly as much of an impact on everyone as it should have, and deserved way more focus than it did. Hopefully that might come up in the future, but for right now, it just feels like an afterthought. Okay, you knew this was coming. You knew this was going to be talked about at some point. I desperately didn't want to constantly be throwing this your face throughout the video, and it being the only point, but it absolutely needs to be stated here on now, because this is definitely a constant thing. Even in Midnight, it seems teamed with it somehow. But there's evidently a very lack of focus on Horde characters, lack of Horde stories going on in the current era of WoW in this World Soul Saga. Some people will choosingly point out that WoW is going more for a neutral story, and lessen the focus on what's going on with the Alliance and Horde, which they've been trying to do since Battle for Azeroth ended. I've very much noticed that. You don't need to point it out. And I do have a problem with it. I don't like it. Particularly because if you're going to use the neutral story angle excuse, then why not tell those neutral stories with Horde characters acting neutral? They've done that with Thrall in the past. They were supposed to do it with Thrall here in War Within. On top of that, you have to take a look on what characters they are telling stories with to contrast it with the Horde. Anduin, the former king of Stormwind, Illyria, leader of the Void Elves, Moira, leader of the Dark Iron, Dogron, future king, Jaina, leader of Kul Tiras. You can tell me all you want about how these characters are neutral, but at the end of the day, a lot of these guys are Alliance leaders acting neutral, and you should be doing the same with the Horde. We had Thrall and we had Gazlowe for this. Thrall, who had very little to almost no screen time beyond art and advertisements and cinematics. And Gazlowe, who didn't even get to lead his own cartel and had to say that the Horde weren't even down in Undermined for some reason. Undermined was not a Horde patch. As somebody who loves the Horde, who likes goblins, it was probably the closest we had to a true neutral patch yet. Far too many people think just because a race of the Horde has relevance, it means that it's their patch or their expansion. Warlords of Draenor gets this rep bad, despite the fact that it's about killing alternate orcs that are essentially the Horde's heroes. They're not our orcs. In Undermined, those aren't our goblins. They're neutral goblins or they're Darkfuse goblins. If they're going to spell it out to us that the Horde aren't down there, it's not a Horde patch then. And in all of the major patches of War Within, the Alliance characters acting neutral showed up. Illyria got to bring the Rendori to help her in Koresh. When Renzik fell, Matthias Shaw, the leader of the SI-7, an Alliance spy network, showed up to pay him respects. I'm not asking for these moments to be removed, or hell, see them less. Hell no. What I am asking for is an olive branch. Gestures akin to the Alliance here, given straight to the Horde. Have Thrall show up at the end of Undermine's story to check up on Gazlowe, and let them talk as friends. On Koresh, have at the very least the Horde have their own camp or characters or faction help out in the fight against the Void. It's little things like this that makes the Horde feel welcomed. It makes us feel like we're a part of the world. It makes us feel like we're a part of the story, and they just have not been doing that. This is why I gave so much high praise to the legacy of Arathor, because both the Alliance and the Horde were given something, and that felt great. It's something WoW simply needs to get back to doing again, because being left out is one of the worst feelings. and I do think this is becoming far more of a vocal thing, mainly because of just how blue the War Within was, how it is. Most of its cast are Alliance heroes. Most of its stories are focused on the Alliance characters and their own plights and arcs. I'm concerned Midnight is going to have this too, but at least we've some focus on the Blood Elves and the Amani to look forward to. But I am worried on WoW's future if they keep doing this and leaving the Horde to collect cobwebs on the shelf. I was brought into WoW because of my investment and love for the Horde faction and characters as a whole. That's why I love World of Warcraft, and I'm seeing more and more what I love about this game just fade away, and I'm not going to be quiet about it. It sucks. And I've just not seen it improve just yet. Legacy of Arathor was the closest we got, and maybe Midnight will convince me otherwise. I'm hoping to be proven wrong, and I'm hoping to be floored with what they tell next. But I ideally hope the Horde are given something bigger in the story than they are right now, as War Within dropped the ball for us. Please give the Horde neutral stories that they can just shine in. Give Thrall something, let Gazlo talk about the Bilgewater Cartel being the Horde. Whatever it takes, just give us something, please. Looking back on War Within as a whole and comparing what came before it, War Within really lacks that bite. Many describe Dragonflight as being fangless, and in some regard, it was lacking in that department too. With Dragonflight, I'd say it's moments that captured me in some regard though. Whether that be the return of Sibelian for the first time since Burning Crusade, the founders of Durotar being reunited after 19 years, the Orcs Koshar with the Heritage questline, or the Draenei's own celebration, or the goddamn Incarnates. I love those guys. Dragonflight, while having its own row of flaws, was fun and kept me excited through other means, through the entire expansion for the most part. It also did have a dragon battle between Raszageth and Alexstrasza, so props given. I cannot really share the same with War Within. Very little big battles, which even Shadowlands had that with Tyrande twice. Very little in characters who'd stay alive long enough for me to really care about them. Mainly new characters, I should probably add. The closest times I remember getting excited was when the Horde reinforcements showed up alongside the Alliance, which really went nowhere. Where was the war in War Within? Because I did not see it. That's why I'm calling it the War Without. Characters that I absolutely wanted to see things from both factions, from factions old and new, just didn't do that much, and if they did, it was extremely brief and felt a little bit rushed in part. There were certainly some exceptions to that, but even then they kinda just off after their roles were seemingly done. Even I think everyone wanted them to do more, I think. It just lacks those hyped cinematic moments that almost every expansion has in them. I'm not sure if it's a budgeting issue, time issue, or what have you, but it just didn't have that fist pump moment that other expansions had. And it just didn't have a group or a faction that gripped me. Pandaria had the Shadowpan and the Klaxi, among a lot others really. Loved Mr. Pandaria. Legion had the Nightborn. Shadowlands even had the Maldraxi. War Within, closest it came to was maybe the Nerubians. But when your favorite moment, favorite character moment of the entire expansion is just the Thrall and Anduin Silithus cinematic that jump-started this whole thing, that just had really good writing and really good beat-for-beat moment, really good dialogue, I think you've messed up there massively. And I'm sorry to say that, truly. While War Within had few highs with some major patches, incredible music here and there, and a pretty good gameplay, I'd say, I think its severe lack of what I was hoping to see, hoping to have, and have accustomed to really is what sapped this expansion on my rankings and where I would place it. And far too many things were cut and moved around to the point where it felt very apparent. And among all the other gripes that I've talked about in this video and expansion prior, that stuff with the Dark Heart and the Horde, definitely, If you told me that the War Within was going to tank this badly following Dragonflight, I think you were a crazy person. What's upsetting the most for me about it falling so far from how it was going was that I had such major hopes for this expansion in particular. At least for Shadowlands, I had a nagging feeling in the back of my head that it wasn't going to be for me from the start. But War Within, I truly thought was going to be a me expansion. An expansion I could look back on and compare to my own personal favorites of Mista Pandaria, Wrath of the Lich King, and yes, even Battle for Azeroth. You can't get me to hate it, guys. But War Within was just not it. It was not it for me, and I think it just falls right under Cataclysm and Warlords of Draenor, two expansions that fumbled in their own ways, but I have a soft spot for those two at least. I'd probably give War Within a ranking of 6 Void Headaches out of 10. It comes close in some areas, but it just fumbles hard in so many others. I don't think this is horrible or even a bad expansion. That's not the right wording I think I could rightfully place on it. It's not Shadowlands bad or anything close, but it's also not a good expansion in my eyes either. It falls right in the middle. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just right there. It exists. It's not for me. This is like the most not for me expansion I think we could get outside of maybe the classic expansions and of course Shadowlands. And as for the start of the World Soul Saga, this isn't looking great, but I'm hoping Midnight will draw me in more than War Within ever did. Hopefully, War Within walked so that Midnight and Last Titan can sprint, so they can run. But, whew, that's my big ol' long video on War Within. The war without, really. But let me know all your fine details on why you didn't like War Within, or maybe why you liked it. I'd honestly love to hear what you guys think about it, and what you think about what I think about down below. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I've been Khono Chronos, your lovely time demigod and host. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more videos like this one in the future. Be sure to join the Discord for more discussions with myself and the community, and a special thanks to the patrons and YouTube community members to help keep this channel alive and well. But until next time, my friends,